I wouldn't necessarily start by buying products specifically for the other hemisphere. I would test it with my best sellers. And I would also, by the way, start by shipping it from my home market before I went into a 3PL offshore. I guess when I'm safe and I'm confident that, yep, this is working, I'm getting 30, 40, 50 orders a day, I'm probably thinking, let's take that to a 3PL and we'll really cut down on our logistics costs. All right, welcome back to the E-Hustle. I'm Paul Waddy. As always, if you like the E-Hustle, don't forget to like it, share it, subscribe, comment, all those sorts of things help. And of course, follow me on socials at Paul Waddy Ecommerce if you want to get more e-commerce tips from me. So today we're talking about how to take your e-commerce brand global. And this is a hot topic because just about everybody wants to do it. The world's getting smaller in e-commerce. And what I mean by that is logistically, we're able to get stuff around the world cheaper if you're smart, right? So particularly if you're listening to this from Australia, we've always faced the distance, the challenge of distance rather, which means that, let's face it, we're on the arse end of the world. So how do we crack the big markets? Now, I want to go straight off the bat here and sort of say that I still think in your domestic market, wherever you are around the world, there's lots of money to be made there. So as an example, I'm sitting here in Australia today. It's not uncommon for brands to get to 20, 30, 40, 50, even 100 million just domestically. Although admittedly, once you're at around that 20 million, 30 million mark, you're probably doing 20 or 30% of it, particularly in the States, but maybe in the UK and around Europe. And of course, New Zealand, although we almost consider New Zealand part of Australia. So, why go global? Well, I mean, if you're an e-commerce brand, you're almost going to be tempted to, right? Because the whole point of e-commerce over, say, brick and mortar retail is that you have this endless aisle. So what I mean by that is you're not constrained by the four walls of your 60, 70 square meter store. You can sell to an infinite amount of customers. So of course, we're going to start to think, what can we do overseas? And it's probably normal in my group of brands that I work with. I reckon about 20% of the revenue total comes from cross-border e-commerce, which means, selling across borders, selling into other countries, export, I guess, is what I'm saying. Now, the opportunity is big, but it's not instant. And with the introduction of tariffs around Europe historically, but recently in the US, there are some things to navigate. But look, it's certainly juicy, it's lucrative, and plenty of brands want to sell overseas. So let's break down today how we can think about doing that, cracking that overseas nut. So, I mean, let's start with the truth about global expansion. Just about every brand that I speak to wants to do well overseas. And there are certain things that I look for. And I guess if we're talking about the big markets around the world, for most of us, we're talking the US, the UK, Europe. Canada's generally pretty good. Germany's pretty good. But, for the most part, we're talking US. Let's just say if you're an Aussie seller, and if you're a US seller, you're probably looking at selling into Europe and maybe even Australia and other parts of the world. So the things that I look for are typically a little bit of organic traction. And so as an example, just today, working with one of my new brands, I said, oh, you're doing $110,000, $120,000 a month in international sales. Comparatively, that's quite good. I was keen to know how much you're putting into that, though, and what your conversion rate is. So what I mean by that is it's expensive to go into a new market usually. And I don't want to see brands burn too much cash doing it, because inevitably you probably will burn cash going international early, unless you're just lucky enough to get some traction, or not lucky enough, skillful enough to get that right product market fit and it just starts going. But if you're a brand that's seeing no international traction at all, but you're desperate to, then it's going to be a slow burn. It's as simple as that. Because if you're established and you've got visitors, you've been going for a couple of years, you've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 sessions a month, you're going to find that Americans and people around the world will find their way to you. There will be some organic traffic. Just in the same way here, good brands domestically also find organic traffic, like people just hear about them and come to them. Now, if you're a brand that has none of that, so you're making virtually no sales in an overseas market, experience will tell me that it's going to be extremely expensive for you to grow in that market. And that might be okay, because you might say, look, I've committed 100,000, 200, 2 million 3 million, 10 million to US or international growth, and I'm okay to burn cash for a year. Fine, you probably will. So what I'm really saying here is if you're going into exporting fresh without much organic traction, you're likely to see two things. One, a significantly lower conversion rate than you're used to in your domestic market. And two, a significantly higher MER, marketing efficiency ratio, than your domestic market. So what I want to do here is just pause for a second and say, if you're that brand listening and you have a conversion rate of 2.3% in Australia and 1.7% in the US, that's actually pretty good and pretty normal. I've been involved with brands who have done really, really well in the US with a smaller conversion rate. That doesn't necessarily mean you're not ready to go. But where you want to be with your MER in an international market is not in a compelling international market, is not too much higher on your MER. Sure, you might elect to bump it up a little bit to go for growth. But if your MER is 18, 20% in Australia, I don't want you rolling in with a 50 or 60% MER in the US and trying to pump that thinking that it's scalable. It's not. What you do want to see is a little bit of that organic traction. For example, a brand that I saw recently who's doing $20,000 a month as an Aussie brand in the US, and you might think, oh, that's not great, but they're spending nothing. They're spending no money at all on ads. And you look at it and you think, well, hang on, we've got organic traction here. So that indicates product market fit. What's the best way to test product market fit, brand strength, those sorts of things? Turn off your ads. So when you see that traction, you think as a coach, you think, yeah, we're on here. And then you think, yep, time to scale it up, set a budget, and go for it. Whereas again, if you see that brand who says, yeah, I'm taking over the US, we're going hard, and you look at it and you say, well, you've got no sales there, your conversion rate's nothing to speak of, you're going to burn a lot of money. So yep, I want to say that the pie is big overseas and we should give it a go, but tread carefully when it comes to two things: tackling your expectations internationally if you have no organic traction, and also if you're not tapping out in your domestic market, just be careful about diluting your marketing spend. It's really hard to break one market, even harder to break two markets. So just think about consolidating your home market before you go international. All right, so the smart way to go into international expansion is to test before you invest. And look, I love Shopify. You know that. Using Shopify markets, which by the way is getting better and better, and I really, for most brands, don't see the need for expansion stores, which means separate stores. Markets is really good. You can set up shipping zones and shipping rates and rules per country. You can set up local currency. You can accept local currency. You can change pricing, all in Shopify markets. You can handle taxes and duties. So I like Shopify markets for the MVP model. I wouldn't necessarily start by buying products specifically for the other hemisphere. I would test it with my best sellers. And I would also, by the way, start by shipping it from my home market before I went into a 3PL offshore. I guess when I'm safe and I'm confident that, yep, this is working, I'm getting 30, 40, 50 orders a day, I'm probably thinking, let's take that to a 3PL and we'll really cut down on our logistics costs. I think, again, reiterating the point that I would be looking for some organic traction, so test before you invest. The organic traction, I don't know, 5, 10, 20,000 a month, depending on the size of your company, without any paid media spend. Then I'm introducing a paid media budget and I'm just testing it to see where the return is, like anything, to see if that particular project is scalable, because it might not be. So that's how I'm testing before I'm investing. Now let's talk a little bit about logistics and payments and currencies. Now, the logistics side of things, I just mentioned, if I'm selling internationally, I'm just doing it as an MVP model, selling from here, right? So I'm just running a few ads. I've had some organic traction. I'm saying, hey, what's the uptick like here? I'm probably also just sacrificing a little bit on the margin, because if I'm shipping internationally, I could be paying $30 or $40 to ship a typical product internationally. And that's not super feasible, but I'm not stressed about that in the MVP testing phase, because I know that I can bring that down to about $15. And the Aussie dollar, if you're an Aussie listening to this, is not super strong right now. So what that essentially means for you guys, or for us, is that our products are really cheap. So if you're selling a t-shirt for $100 Aussie and you convert it to US at the moment, that's going to be about 63 US dollars. So what you'll find is your product's probably really cheap in the States. So you're seeing a lot of brands, and I'm focusing on the States, but this does apply around the world. You see a lot of brands actually say, I'm going to bump my USD pricing up. And what ends up happening then is your margin becomes better offshore than it is locally. And at the very least, it covers the price of shipping or taxes and duties. We'll come back to taxes and duties in a second. But let's just say, what do we need to do? Well, we need to accept the local currency. So we need people to shop in their local currency. When it comes to logistics, let's test it from our local market. So we'll ship it internationally. When we've got some traction, let's move into a 3PL. Now, it depends what you're shipping, but your cost for serving an order over there will be significantly cheaper. So if you're shipping items from Australia to the US, you're probably paying $30 or $40, depending on who you're using. If you're going to move into a 3PL, you're probably looking at closer to $12 all told to pick, pack, ship, including import costs if you're sea freighting. So it's seriously compelling. You're going to save a lot of money on your logistics costs, which you can either pocket or you can use to cover the cost of these duties that are really annoying right now, let's be honest. So let's just touch base, depending on when you're listening to this. Duties is a moving beast in the US. However, let's just say you're an apparel brand selling into the US and the duty's coming around 50%. Now, essentially what that means is if I sell goods into the US from another country, and again, I'm focusing on US, but the same applies in Europe, right, with taxes. If I'm shipping from Australia, I'm paying 50%, if my products are made in China, of course. I'm paying 50% duty, roughly, depending on what happens next week and the week after, but I'm paying 50% duty on the retail price. So put simply, that's not feasible for anyone unless your margins are incredible. It's not feasible. So if I relocate to the US and ship directly from China to the US, I'm paying the 50% on the cost price. So already a significant saving. But again, the logistics saving from say $30 to $40 to send an order internationally to about $12 or $10, depending on your rates in the US, you're actually finding that brands will more than cover these duties by relocating to the US. And then if you increase your pricing a little bit, because again, I mentioned before, the exchange rate's not good. That means your products are probably cheap in the US. So if you increase your pricing a little bit, you're not just going to wash your face and cover your costs. You actually could be significantly more profitable, even post the introduction of duties, by setting up shop in the US, more profitable than before duties, right? I've seen that happen. So it's a compelling case. Then you throw into 2-day delivery and, the opportunity to serve customers really, really fast in the US. There's a compelling argument to move to the US if your volume's there. But take a step back. MVP model, that is not what I would do. So let's think about some of the golden rules for going global if you're an e-com brand. Wait for organic traffic before jumping, or organic traction, I guess, before spending heavily. Offer local currency, so use Shopify Markets is my example there. Price correctly, so don't just switch currency symbols. So don't just say, here's my pricing, divide it by 0.64. Like, don't just use the exchange rate. You might find that you're way too cheap. Now, I'll just ask you this quickly. If the rates Aussie to US is $63 and you took this t-shirt and you said, well, it's $100, or say a jumper, it's $100 a bit expensive for a t-shirt. I've got a jumper, it's $100 Aussie, therefore it's $64 US. Is that smart? Because what happens then if the Aussie dollar jumps, and it has, up to 85 cents over 12 to 18 months? Does that mean that you'll just go, oh, well, this jumper's now 85? There's not a lot of thought in that. You price it for where the market will tolerate, and that might be 85 now, and you're leaving margin on the table. So I don't believe in pricing for the exchange rate. I just don't think that's smart. So you've got to test for the market. So one, make sure your margin's strong enough, but two, price appropriately for the market. And I'm just saying, as an Aussie brand, with the exchange rate at 63, 64 cents, there's every chance that if you're just converting to USD, you're underpricing yourself. Test it out. Bump it up. Incremental testing. You could find your margin obliterates your US margin, obliterates your Aussie margin. So that's a really important test. Competitive shipping eventually. So fast, I say initially, I say just test it by shipping from Australia to your international markets. And eventually, when the volume's there, get a 3PL. Once you get a 3PL, you might consider onboarding some marketplaces. Really interesting to note that internationally, marketplaces dominate e-commerce. If you're listening to this in the US, it's probably 68% of all retail going through marketplaces. There's a marketplace everywhere. Walmart, Costco, obviously Amazon and so on, but they're everywhere. In Australia, it's much less. So you might consider, as part of your international expansion plans, is going into one of these marketplaces if you are going to set up a 3PL. Now, we've got to handle local returns. So we obviously want to do that with our 3PL. We might be using Refunded for returns or Loop or something like that. So we want to handle returns really, really nicely. We want to handle taxes and duties. Look, for me, I've never seen any evidence to show that DDU, which is delivered duties unpaid, is better than DDP for the customer, delivered duties paid, right? So essentially, if I'm shipping DDP, it means I've got your duty covered. We've baked it into our pricing. You're just going to get your parcel. Delivered duties unpaid, DDU, means you'll send your goods, but it's the customer's obligation to sort out taxes and duties. I've done this before. They won't come back to you, right? So for me, it's DDP or nothing. Language matters. So start with countries that simply speak your language, right? So when is the right time to expand? I think it depends on your home market size, let's be honest. If you're in the US, you don't really have an urgent need to sell internationally because look at the size of your domestic market. If you're in Australia and you're doing 20, 30 million a year, yep, probably time to start looking overseas. If you're in Australia and you're doing 300K a year, why dilute your already tiny marketing spend? Just focus on your home market first before you even worry about conquering an international market. I think that's really important. And I think just remembering that fact that if you're an Aussie, most of my brands will get to 20, 30 million before really turning their attention to the US or another market. You can have a dabble, but again, I want to see organic traction. Don't worry, those international markets will hear about you if you're doing a good job. So it is possible to get traction without spending if you're a red hot brand. Don't jump too early. Reach your ceiling locally or push your ceiling locally because again, I see those stores who have 2 markets or 3 markets and they're dividing their paid media spend up. It's just diluting spend. I'll just repeat that it's hard enough to crack one market, throw a second one in and a third one. That's a really tough slog. You might have overall a decent marketing spend of 100, 200, 300 grand a month. But then you split it into 3 and you're like, that's actually a pretty small marketing spend when you break it up to each market. So I think there's an argument to consolidate on one market first. Really tap that out before you push or dilute your spend into a second market. My closing thoughts on international expansion would be that it is a huge opportunity and we should all be thinking about it. We're in e-commerce. That's part of the beauty of it. It's borderless, right? But it does come with risk. And that risk is usually the amount of capital that you will require to expand internationally. Most brands jump into it and it doesn't deliver what they thought. So again, like anything, see the traction, fish where the fish are, as I always say. Where the traction is, go after it. That saying exists, low-hanging fruit for a reason. Always go after the low-hanging fruit. And if international ain't it, just pause for a while. And we've got to think about, think of it as a marathon, not a sprint. There's a long-term payoff potential here. It rarely kind of goes really, really quickly. So again, you've got to have, if you're a business that doesn't have the working capital and you're always running out of money or you're low profit, you're probably not going to focus on international because it can be a slow burn. So they're the things that I would look out for. And of course, I'm not stressed about the duties and tariffs at all because if you're serious about, because if you're not doing business in the US, or Europe, great news. The tariffs and taxes don't matter to you. And if you are doing volume, so they do matter for you, then off you go into a 3PL. We talk to our brands about that all the time. And you'll more than wash your face. In fact, you'll come out probably more profitable if you develop the correct international logistics strategy. And I would add, pricing strategy. So I'm not as stressed as everybody else about the tariffs, the taxes, and the duties. That can be overcome. Using those sort of 2 simple beliefs that I just mentioned. So look, worry about that if you're making the sales overseas. And if you are, cool, we'll solve that. If you're not, why would you worry about tariffs, taxes, and duties anyway? Okay, until then, happy selling.